Hi, everybody, and karibuni sana to this month's Msingi Talks. I am very honored today to be hosting this conversation. We'll be talking about is Palestine and Israel, what's going on, and what's Africa's role in struggle. As always, I'm honored that we are able to have these conversations. Apologies from our normal, I would say normal moderator, Danish Odongo. He's unable to make it today, but I hope I am able to represent him well and do the work that he does so very well. So we have a great panel of guests here. First, they'll introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce Msingi, and then we can go with the questions. Please make sure you ask all the questions that you can on the Facebook Live page. Please tell your friends to come and join us in this conversation, and let's learn. I am here to learn. I am here to be in solidarity, and I am here to be in conversation with people who love this world, who are working to make for a better world. And yeah, so we'll start with you, Suhail. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suhail, and I'm currently organizing with Kenyans for Palestine. And I'm also a researcher working and looking into policing, militarism, and surveillance in Kenya and larger Africa.
Asante, Suhail. Karibu sana. Naomi?
Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi Barasa. I'm a member and chair of the Kenya Palestine Solidarity Movement and a human rights defenders as well. Thank you, and honored to be on this panel. Thank you.
Karibu sana, Naomi. Uncle Moss.
Thank you. My name is Mosenka. I'm a pastor in a church, and I work also in the Palestine Solidarity networks that are church-based with the Kairos South Africa, which has relationships with Kairos in Palestine. I'm an activist, and we worked with the anti-apartheid struggle here and continue to smell oppression, racism, and apartheid wherever in the world it is. And I get activated.
Karibu sana, Uncle Moss. Edwin? You're on mute.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Edwin Harrison. I live close to Cape Town. I work in Cape Town. I'm a priest of the Anglican Church, and I'm also the development officer at the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation, but work with other organizations as well, including Kairos Southern Africa with Moslem Pla, and another group called SACLI, which is the South African Christian Leaders Initiative. Happy to be with you all.
Thank you. My name is Carol Nganga. I am your host today. I work for Msingi Trust, and I want to do a basic, a small introduction to Msingi in the form of a video, which should be playing. Oh, wait, there's a problem with the sound. Let's see.
What does social justice, activism, advocacy, and the Christian faith have in common? Is pursuing justice at all levels a spiritual discipline? How do we influence church leaders and Christians to advocate for justice and fight injustice? How can churches become the first line of defense for the socially unprotected? Msingi is a movement of people spurred by their Christian faith to answer these questions about social justice, advocacy, and activism. Msingi believes the church can be empowered to redemptively advocate for justice for the most oppressed, for those relegated to the fringes of society, for the disempowered and those without access to power. In his inaugural sermon, Jesus spoke about those on the margins of society, about their freedom and their liberation. Pursuing justice is at the core of being a Jesus follower. Justice and righteousness is the foundation of God's throne. Msingi's name, call, heart, and bold mission draws from this, holding true to the tenets of God's kingdom. Our faith propels us to seek justice and spend ourselves on behalf of the poor. Justice is their shield and defender. At Msingi, we are about connecting the struggles that we all face. We are creating safe spaces to converse about social justice, curating content that enhances justice conversations, and in this way, uniting the stand for social justice and for advocacy. Engage the content, join in the conversations, connect to the movement. This is Msingi.
So that is us. That's the work that we do, and I am very honored to be in various networks that allow me to do that. And one of the networks that I'm part of is the Social Justice Working Group Movement, and I want to shout out Pesh, who's helping me with the social media today, and also Naomi and Suhail. I was connected to you through my connections with the social justice movement. So thank you for saying yes to that invitation. And Uncle Moss, I've met you briefly. I remember at the airport, and then we've had a few conversations. Then and Edwin through invitation by the warehouse, and Renee and Craig, thank you for honoring this conversation. The reason I felt we needed to talk about this was because this has been going on for so long. Ever since I was a child, I used to hear about the Gaza Strip. I did not know what the Gaza Strip is. I honestly, even till now, I'm not very sure who or what is the Gaza Strip. Why are people fighting? And so today we are hoping, but we know that there are oppressed people. We know that there are people who have been occupied. Today we want to know who is oppressed, who is occupying what, and what is the role of Africa? What can we do as Africans? And so my first question, I will ask this question to Suhail. How did we get here? Who is fighting? What is being fought about, and why?
Thank you, Carol. I think the issue of Palestine and Israel is, especially the Palestinian history, is a very complex history. But what we need to understand is that the violence that we're seeing and the conflict that we're seeing is not confined to the basis of religion, and that's something that we really need to understand. It's a political war, and it's been happening for the past 73 years, even after the British mandate gave over the mandate to the United Nations. So what we need to understand is this war has been happening since 73 years ago, and that's just once the Palestine since the Nakba. So what we need to see is the biggest thing that Palestinians are fighting at the moment. They are fighting for their land. And once you're fighting for your land, it means you're fighting for liberation of your country and you're fighting for your freedom. So to downplay and defang the actions of Palestinians as violence is to essentially pacify what exactly it is they're fighting for. This is a fight for freedom. This is a fight for liberation. This is a fight for justice and essentially their land. As we've seen in the past few days, we've seen the residents of Sheikh Jarrah who are being forcefully dispossessed from their homes, and it's being put out as a real estate issue. It's neither a real estate issue, it's neither an issue that can be sorted in any court at this moment, because we're seeing the courts are very biased to the Israeli regime that's ruling now. And what we need to understand is this is not a fight against Jews. It's a fight against Zionism. So this is a it's an internationalist fight that we are in. And to answer your question, how did we get here? And I think I'll just give a brief summary of what's been happening over the past few days. So about 2-3 weeks ago, the residents of Sheikh Jarrah in occupied Palestine were being evicted from their homes one by one. But there's a few families that have been fighting the issue in court for about a decade or more than a decade now, and they haven't been getting results. The case has been postponed over and over again. But the Zionists who are illegally occupying this land and these homes are taking over this land without any justification. And the key justification is that the land is Israeli land. So after that, the citizens of Sheikh Jarrah started protesting and fighting against this fascism that's ruling Palestine at the moment. And the first thing that the Israeli Zionist regime sought to do fit was to attack Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it's interesting to understand that Al-Aqsa Mosque is very important, not just for the Muslim Palestinians, but the whole Palestinian community. Because if you look at Al-Aqsa, the compound has a Muslim quarter, it has a Christian quarter, it has a Jewish quarter. So to look at it, to understand why they attacked Al-Aqsa was to defang essentially all the organizing that the Palestinians had been doing. Because at the moment, when Sheikh Jarrah residents were protesting, Palestinians in Gaza started protesting, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank started protesting, Palestinians in Haifa started protesting. So this was essentially to curb what's happening. And I think with all this rising solidarity, the Israeli Zionist regime saw that they are at risk of losing the already precarious legitimacy they've been trying to get. So as we speak now, Palestinians continue facing dispossession of their land. If you look at the maps and compare Israel 73 years ago, Palestine 73 years ago and now, you can see that this is something that's been happening. Settler colonialism has been happening and is still happening. It is something that is ongoing. And one thing to note is a lot of this is being justified using religion and historical perspectives, but that isn't the case again. This is mainly a political war, it's a political conflict, and to understand what exactly is happening is before the rule or the existence of Israel as a state and the existence of or the manufacture of Zionism as an ideology, we saw Arabs, Jews, Christians, and Muslims living all together. This isn't something that we are guessing. This is not something that we are assuming. This is something that has been documented in history by all these international blocs, by historians, and by Palestinians themselves. So to minimize this war to a religious war is to erase Palestinian history. And just to end at that, I will read a quote from the British Hope Simpson report of 1930 that noted the Jewish residents of non-Zionist communities in Palestine enjoyed friendship with their Arab neighbors. And to quote, it said, it's quite a common sight to see Arabs sitting in the veranda of the Jewish house, the report noted. The position is entirely different in Zionist colonies. So you can see the issue is not an issue of existing Palestinians who are living on their land, or the Jews who came and were living, coexisting with Palestinians on their land. The issue is Zionism. So essentially what Palestinians are fighting is the rule of Zionism.
Thank you, Suhail. And I'd like to ask Edwin, what was happening in the 1940s that has brought us here? So if you're able to, you can help trace that history for us as well.
Thank you. It's actually quite interesting how both what happened in Palestine and also what happened in South Africa happened at the same time. We, in 1948, we got an apartheid regime in power here in South Africa. And that's exactly the same time that, that Israel was formed. Interestingly, again, and I speak as a South African, of course, the relationship between these two entities have been there since that time. But what happened in Palestine of course, is that initially many of the villages where the Palestinians lived, and Moss can say more about this, those villages were completely erased, and the Palestinians were driven from their homes, and some of them are still refugees in Lebanon, in Syria, and in other neighboring countries there. Some of the Palestinians who were driven out of their homes in the 40s actually still have the key to their homes, and these homes were then completely erased. And nowadays, what you have these parks all over what is now called Israel. But there's a longing from the refugees who are sitting in other parts of the Middle East. There's a longing from them to come home. And so effectively, the maps that I think Sohail was referring to, you begin to see the land shrinking, the Palestinian land shrinking. At the time, the United Nations wants to make a deal and say, okay, Palestine, we give you 45% of the land, Israel, we give you 55% of the land. Now, no self-respecting people would accept anything like that. How do you take more than half of my land and give it to others, people who have come in from outside? And so where we are now is that a few years ago, I think when the Oslo Agreement was signed, Palestine was actually only 22% of the original land. And today it's even less. I think it's 13% today. So land for the Palestinians have shrunk, and it's been a typical sense of divide and rule, actually, because now what you have, and just to come back to South Africa, in South Africa we had these homelands, and there's one homeland called Bophuthatswana, and Bophuthatswana had these little bits of dots all over parts of the country in the north, but it was called one country. And so the typical apartheid ideology is to divide and rule. And so you divide the Palestinians, you build these settlements on the high hills around, and you dominate the land completely. And so this is really the story. It's been a story of colonialism, a story of land dispossession of the Palestinians, and beyond that, a story of erasure of Palestinian history, erasure of even the very being of Palestine. So sometimes when I preach in the churches here in South Africa about Palestine, the first thing I do, I say to the congregation, say the word Palestine. And we all say the word Palestine, because it's important that we reverse what the attempt that's happening to erase Palestine completely. That's I think we should be talking about. How do we ensure that the name Palestine does not get erased and the people of Palestine does not get erased?
Thank you, Edwin. Uncle Moss, there are a few terms that are coming up. There is Zionism. There is, and I'd like, before we go further, is to first speak into the difference between Zionism, between the Jewish identity, between Israel, Muslim, Palestine, and who is Palestine? Who is Israel? What is Zionism? I know I'm asking very many definitions, but one of the questions that a lot of us have is, why are we saying this is Zionism? But also, if I am pro-Palestine, does that mean I am anti-Semitic? And what is that difference? What's the difference of those terms? Uncle Moss, you're on mute.
Trying to be modest. Yeah, I'll have a first shot at that, and colleagues can add. I think you've asked several questions which in and of themselves can take us the rest of the evening. Zionism is a word Jewish people have always used. Israel, I will put it, the Jews have this relationship with the land. When God promised them the land, he said that it's a covenant. It's based on a covenant between them and God. And if they keep the covenant, they will live in peace. If they break it, the land itself will spew them out. In other words, they'll be exiled from the land and so on. So, and that has happened several times over the long history of Jewish people. And so, and the last exile happened about 2,000 years ago, where they were dispersed because they violated the covenant. In the Christian sense, with the ultimate sin of violation of the covenant was to murder Jesus, Jesus, the Son of God. They killed him. And so there's no more blatant way to violate God than to do that. And so the land, therefore, became an enemy of the Jews. Now, in the history when they've repented and came back to the land, they've called it, they're going back to Zion, they're going back to Israel, to Jerusalem, to the Mount Zion. So the theme of Zion was always meant Jewish people returning to the land. Now, in this instance, since 1948, they bombed their way into the land. As Edwin said, they destroyed communities that they found there, 500 villages and towns that were literally destroyed in 1948. Innocent people, men, women, and children. And all of that out of a political understanding of Zionism, which was, I think, Surai talked about it as the occupation or the colonization of the land, which you can imagine. They had been dispersed from that land for over 2,000 years. They come there, the land has people, the wealthy people of the world, the British and some wealthy Americans agree among themselves that they need to arrange accommodation for these Jewish people. Where do they go? They'll take them to Palestine. And what to do with those people who are there? Well, those people are not white people, are an inferior race. You just bomb them. That's what everyone else has done. That's what Europe did to Africa. That's what they do to the Australians did to those Native Australians, and that's what they did to Native Americans. So it's the same project, the same people, the same logic of racism that does not respect the natives. And so Zionism then is a political project, ideology. It is a white supremacist, and so that's why it had all of the interest or the support of Europe and so on. Now, Christian Zionism, which is even more dangerous because the Christian West around the world, US and elsewhere, have for unclear reasons come into alliance with political Zionism and supported the project that the Jewish people must go there, must figure out how they make themselves home there, because in the view of these Christians, it is a necessary part of the end time that Jesus will come for the second time when the Jews are back in their land. I don't know where they get that from, but that's what they believe. And so it's out of these mistaken beliefs and understanding of scripture that Jesus Christ's return requires the occupation of Palestine by Jewish people. And that's what's wrong about it. And that is why it is dangerous. It is Donald Trump came to power as a result of Christian support. And he strengthened some of the most hideous policies of Israel, including the story about Jerusalem, making it the capital, eternal capital of Israel, which even Jewish people say there is no such thing in Jewish religion. There is no capital, no political capital as such. And so, but because it is supported by the Christian West, it won the day and caused the agony of many people in Palestine. And so, so that's the Zionism story. I don't remember which other question you asked about. About who the Palestinian people are and what's the demographics there. I think in Israel now, and Palestine, and even before 1948, there were Palestinian people in the land, all the land from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, from the south in Egypt to Syria up in the north. Palestinian people occupied the land. Were the Jewish people there? There were, yes, there were some Jewish people who did not survive the dispersal, and so they were a minority. But they lived in peace with Palestinians. There were Christians, and there were Muslims, there were Jews. It was a peaceful environment, and there were Druze people. A peaceful environment of people living together until 1948, when I think so I mentioned it too, that when settlers came in, killed those local people who resisted, including the Jews who were there, who had been living at peace with these people. They were, if they stood in the way, they were killed off, just like the Palestinians and everyone else. And to this date, since 1948 till now, the Jews, there's almost a political project. They call it Aliyah, which is I don't know, it's a Hebrew word that says encourage every Jew on the planet to go back to Israel, to populate the space, to change the facts on the ground about land ownership. And every Jew who volunteers to come from wherever, whether it is Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, or USA, or South Africa, or wherever, when they come to Israel, I heard they are given $100,000 or something like that, just to help them settle. You know, so a guy could be broke in New York, couldn't make it. They tell him, oh, you can go to Israel, you'll get this amount of money, you become a settler, and you stay there, and your business is going to beside all of the big corporations are headquartering in Israel now. So they incentivize people who come in there, and they find themselves being settlers and taking people's home. And so, yeah, I think I've said too much. Let me hold fire there.
Thank you, Uncle Moss. Naomi, what is the difference? Please, I was told as I was preparing this conversation that please ensure that you're not anti-Semitic in your conversations. And I have a lot of, this is one conversation where I've sent out messages and I've been given a lot of guidance on how to have this conversation. So what is anti-Semitism, and can you be pro-Palestinian and still pro the Jewish people? Yeah, Naomi.
Thank you so much, Carol, for that question. We usually get that quite a bit. And I want to say that, number one, it is possible to be pro-Palestine without being anti-Semitic. And I feel I really regret that there's so much emphasis around this concept of anti-Semitism, because it's being used against people who stand in solidarity with Palestinians. And I want to say that anti-Semitism is an attack to the identity of Jewish communities and their identity and their religion and their gosh, the word has gone, but generally, yes. So when we say that you are likely going to be anti-Semitic, I find it sometimes an excuse or an obstacle towards people standing in with resistance against human rights violation, because what the Palestinian struggle is about is a people reclaiming their humanity and reclaiming their dignity. Of course, they've for over years, for over decades, we've had over 7 decades, they've been going through human rights violations, through colonialism, through illegal occupation and domination, which also comes with a lot of discrimination and ill treatment that dehumanizes them. So what they have simply done has been to stand up for their rights. And the violations to their rights have been so many. Their violation to their right to life, their rights to adequate housing, resisting forced evictions, displacement, and inhuman settlements. Like historically, we've had the Nakba entailed over 700,000 Palestinians displaced. Their land has been taken over. We call it land taken. We make it even sound very beautiful. Yet we are supposed to say land grabbing, because land grab is an illegal thing, is a violation. Of course, they've been resisting illegal occupation. They've been fighting for their livelihoods, because they have lost their lands, they have lost their farms, they have lost their olive farms, their food, their water has been contaminated. They fighting for clean and safe environment. Worship, their right to worship, their right and so when you have people fighting by individuals and violated by the state, particularly Israel with their other international allies, it is wrong to just decide that this resistance is anti-Semitism or the kind of solidarity they receive will be. So I think when you receive this kind of warnings a lot of times is because you are being cowed to step your solidarity down, so that you do not support the Palestinians. I want to say that the lives of Palestinians is as important as the life of any other person in this world, including those Israelis. So there is no issue of talking about Israel and the bad things they are doing. You risk being anti-Semitic, yet we are not talking about the children they are bombing. We are not talking about the women who are being killed. We are not talking about their food and every. So I think it is a way to silence people in the solidarity in standing up for their rights. And I'm glad that the Palestinians are very clear that they are not fighting the Jews' identity. They are not fighting their history and what have you. They are simply fighting for what is theirs. They are fighting for their lives. They are fighting for their land. They are fighting for the future of their children, for the future of Palestine. We heard how their land has been annexed in the last 73 years. Nobody is talking about that. I mean, well, of course, activists and solidarity movements are talking about that, and Palestinians, but the others, for example, I am so saddened and super embarrassed by the Biden regime, because a lot of people celebrated them when they came to power, thinking that they were going to be any different. Look at what commitment he has made. Look at the condolences he sent, and look at the solidarity message he sent to Israel, not mentioning even one soul of the Palestinian children who have lost life in the attacks. So I think it is possible, and a lot of people have not been anti-Semitic, only that they use this a lot to cow us down. Thank you.
Asante, Naomi. And I want to we have two reverends in this panel, and I know a lot of people will want to understand, is the Israel that we are talking about is it the biblical Israel that's in the Bible? And then when you're asked to seek the peace of Jerusalem, what does that mean? Maybe one of you can give a response before we go to the next question, because this conversation is confusing to many, a few Christians who want to follow their faith, but then do not understand which Israel are we talking about, which Jews are we talking about, and then also, is this a Christian's fight to fight? Edwin.
Well, I think the short answer is no. Let me quickly explain that. The terms used in the Bible, of course, you have the land of Judah and the land of Canaan, and of course today it's called Israel. And the problem with today's Israel, and I'll get back to the name again, is that they have not declared any borders, meaning and there's no constitution either that they have declared. So it's a very fluid concept. If tomorrow they take over the Syrian Golan Heights or other parts of Syria, they will just include it into Israel. And so there's this kind of we call it semiotics. They get away with using words and using words in a particular way. And the word Israel is one of those kind of words that they use. And of course, Jacob in the Old Testament was called Israel, and then the people were called the people Israel. So I can see from an ideological point of view how it is easy to then take that word and then to create, and particularly on the back of extreme oppression of the Jewish people by Europe. And so what you then have, you have 6 million Jews killed, and there's a huge sympathy on the one hand. But besides sympathy, there's also guilt, and there's also lack of taking responsibility. So what happens is that instead of Europe taking responsibility for their anti-Semitism, which is real, and let us never think that anti-Semitism is not a reality, it is a reality. It's like racism also, and those of us who are Black, we understand racism, and so no one can tell Black people about racism actually. So and so we understand that, and then you have people who have an ideology called Zionism, and again, we must educate people about history, because the ideology of Zionism comes from the late 1800s. It's not something that happened post-Holocaust. It was a dream to set up this place. And I mean, the Zionists, the early Zionists, Herzl and others, they looked at Uganda as a possibility. They looked at Argentina as a possibility. And they eventually settled on this place called Palestine. And so it was a very strategic move, and to work together with the British, who of course were the protectors in the sense of the land of Palestine. They then set up this state, and the state is now called Israel. And it's interesting that they use that word because they know for a fact that the word like Zion and so on would cause confusion, and there would be sympathy for the word within Christian circles, because those of us who are in the church, every single day we read about Israel and about Zion and so on and so forth. And so there's this ideological way of claiming this word. And I think what our task would be is in a way to reclaim the word and to give it new content in the same way that we did with words here in South Africa. But so Christians ask me, is the Israel of the Old Testament, of the Bible, is that the same as Israel today? The answer is no, simply because
no, have we lost Edwin? Or am I the one who's lost?
Are you able to hear me?
Okay, we've lost. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know why that happened. But anyway, I was just trying to say that the Israel of the Bible and the Israel of today are not the same things. Today's Israel is a political and ideological construct, and it's useful to use that word in order to confuse people, but it's not the same thing.
Thank you, Edwin. And I'm sure that has just confused a lot of people in the timelines and in the comment section. Please keep asking your questions. We'll have some time to answer them. So Suhail, I want for you to mention a bit on the role of colonialism and capitalism in fueling this war. And maybe we can all have 2 minutes because there's so many questions and our time is running out very quickly. So what's the role of colonialism, military industrial complex, and if we can explain terms, and capitalism in fueling this war?
Thank you. I think that's quite an important question, especially once it comes to looking at solidarity and the violent occupation of Israel. To look at colonialism in basic terms is just the conquering of an already existing land and taking over its resources, its economy, its material, and conquering its people. So it means taking over the land. Well, looking at colonialism, this is important because what is happening today in Palestine is colonialism. The reason we're calling it occupied Palestine is because the Israeli regime is imposing its rule on the Palestinian land. And even if we look at it, the Palestinian land did have its sort of governance, and we can date back to Yasser Arafat's PLO, and we can look at Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And continually, you see there's some sort of governance that's happening, but the Israeli fascist regime continue undermining it. So what's happening, and why we should be using the language of settler colonialism and not just invasion or occupation, is because these people who are settling in this land in most times have no proximity to even Israel as a state, quote unquote. And it's important to realize that these people are only being incentivized, as Moss had said earlier, to come and live in this area because the Israeli regime is looking for a credibility within the international arena. And one of the key things to give it this credibility is having a population. If we try and date back historically and look at who belongs to Israel, you'll find it's a very minimal number of people. And these people also who are coming in proximity to Israel are kind of picking up a notion that's a fallacy. So I think in terms of colonialism, it is ongoing. That's what's happening in Israel. Israel is a settler colony because you can see what it's doing to Palestine. And in terms of militarism and surveillance, I would add is essentially, let's look at what Israel is doing. If Kenya is buying military arms, weaponry, or surveillance systems from Israel, it means these mechanisms have been used on the Palestinians as to try it out. So whatever Israel is doing is also furthering its military capability and positioning itself as a military superpower because it's being funded by it's being backed and funded by the UK, the US, France, Germany. So we need to look at it from a perspective of what's happening. It's not just a conflict, it's not just a crisis. It's Israeli aggression against Palestine. It's Israeli colonialism, settler colonialism against Palestine. And just to answer your question again on capitalism, it's the same thing. What is imperialism if not a manifestation of capitalism? Is what Israel wants to do is get this land, accumulate all this land, dispossess all these Palestinians so they can use it to their advantage. And we can look at it from terms of economic capacities, in terms of flow of capital. If they get rid of the Palestinians, it means all the flow of capital within the occupied Palestinian land will be overlooked and will be controlled by the Israeli regime. And that's what, in essence, they want to do. So if we look at a lot of wars, even, capitalism is a key driver of these wars. For example, just looping in apartheid South Africa, looping in a closer example of Kenya's illegal occupation of Somalia's southern border. What is the reason of these occupations and these wars, if not accumulation of resources and monetary flow? It's to track the flow of capital and control it. So in terms of militarism, that's Israel's key weapon against the Palestinians, as you can see. While Israel is bombing Palestinians in their homes, Palestinians are retaliating with drones. So if you look at this, we must make these parallels. We must understand why Israel has this capacity of arms and weapons. It's because of all the Western-backed countries that are backing it in terms of militarizing it, in terms of funding it, in terms of training their militaries, and it also comes back to these countries buying all this weaponry from Israel as war grade. Because for Israel to sell and advertise these weapons of theirs, it means they have tried and tested it on the Palestinians. They have violated them with it. So, in summary, that's what I would say. But keeping with the 2 minutes, I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Suhail. Thank you. I think you've explained what those terms are very well, and Asante for that. Now, I want to take it a bit to now do sort of a compare and contrast. There is and Naomi, I'd like you to answer this. There is, and we've maybe, and we touched on it a bit, and we wanted to explain Judaism, Zionism, Islam, and Christianity. Is this a religious war? And we said that it is not. And so I just want us to be clear on that. But what do you tell the people who believe that this is a religious war? What are we achieving by making this a religious war, Naomi?
Thank you, Carol, and Suhail has explained really, really well, and the bishop, the two bishops' names confuse me, but the latest speaker, they have explained very well that these are colonial, these are ideological regimes, political ideologies and regimes that are dominating a nation, a state. So my advice would be, let's not go that route, because attempting to go that route is dividing the world, and dividing the world in a way that, like, look at Kenya, for example. Only very are standing in, because according to them, this is a religious war, and so they'd rather stand with Israel. And so branding it as a religious war is a misconception, but it's not by mistake, it's not by default, it's by design, so that Israel, as someone mentioned, can attract sympathy from the world. So I think just making sure that that people are clear that this is not religious. And I want to say that when you look at the organizing and the Palestinian struggle in Palestine, you realize that Christian populations in Palestine are engaged in organizing on the at the grassroots. They are involved in resisting, because the Zionist regime is marked by violations that are affecting everyone across the board. It cuts across gender, it cuts across creed, it cuts across religion, it cuts across age. We have seen what they've been doing to each and every person within the boundaries of Palestine. So it's not right to call it that. But I also wanted to add something on the issue of colonialism and capitalism. When you look at, historically, when you look at Britain and the role Britain played in creating and establishing a home for the Jewish population, you clearly trace a lot of colonialism there. And when they write to the UN in 1946 to take over, in 1947, when they are overwhelmed and refer the matter to the UN, which part 1716, when a governor, a British governor, writes to declare that they should create a home. So looking at all this, who are they in the first place to decide what is supposed to happen to the Palestinian land? But look at how it is embraced and implemented. And then when you look at the role of the US in this whole issue, look at how much money they send in assistance to Israel. Look at how much they are willing to even tell lies publicly to save the face of Israel, even when the whole world can see. So it is not complete to think about colonialism without thinking about the Balfour Declaration, and not complete without thinking about the role of the UN and the role of the UN and Britain in the 181 resolution to create two states in Palestine. So I think it's important that we look at that, but also look at the consumption of weapons and wars in the world. It's very important to think about that. And then I wanted to say, when we look at the human rights violations, and this is in response to the anti-Semitism question, I'd forgotten to add this. It's important to know that what people are asking about Israel is not anything out of the blues. It's very clear, internationally agreed laws within the international human rights laws, which bind, including Israel, to respect and protect the rights of other people. Yet they are not doing this, so that what they are doing is simply criminal in the international human rights space. Because there are very clear frameworks, there are very clear treaties that bind Israel to not do what they're doing in Israel. So I thought it should be important to remind people that what the Palestinians are asking is so legitimate, even at the international human rights law level. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, for that. One of the reasons I really felt it was important to have South Africans on this call is because we have been, a lot has been said that what is going on currently in Palestine is apartheid. And I'll ask Edwin, no, let me ask Morse to define for us what is apartheid, and how, and then what is apartheid, and then what then the two of you can share with us about the differences and similarities with what is going on in Palestine and Israel, with what you guys experienced, because this is in your lived memory.
Thanks, Carol. Apartheid is a construct that governs, could say it's an ideology actually, which South Africa experimented with, which organizes life, society, everything in terms of race. And that was all in pursuit of the preservation of the white race in an African continent that was largely Black. And so this white minority needed a security of survival, and therefore they organized. Firstly, they colonized the place, and then by use of sheer power and military and otherwise, enforced this social policy. And everything from where you were born was decided by your race. Where you went to school was decided by your race. What job you could get was decided by your race. What you could study. For example, I wanted to be an engineer when I finished high school. I had a scholarship to do it. I applied at a university, local university, to do engineering. They said no Black people allowed here. It is only for white people. White people could, engineering was only possible if you were white. If you were not white, you had to go out of the country to go study engineering. And when you come back, obviously, you don't get a job also, because the reason they didn't want you to study engineering was, according to government policy, you were not allowed to participate as equals with white people in the economy. And so exclusion was built into it. It went so far as to say, even when you go to the beach, there was a section for white people, for Black people. And not to mention, even intermarriage, you couldn't think of Black and white being romantically involved. You are arrested, basically, if you are seen being close to somebody who is white. But it happened anyway. You know, people broke the rules, and it was happening in all sorts of ways. But all of this was a way, or it was apartheid. And so in terms of education, for example, 5 times more was spent on white kids' education than Black kids. And that had the built-in logic that guaranteed inequality. Education was compulsory for all white people. It was optional for Black people. And so a whole number of laws were put in place to make this work, and they were followed to the latter. Any non-compliance, you were met with the full might of the law and brutality and so on. And just to tackle your question about the similarity of this with Israel. Israel has implemented or studied a law based on race, where they would like, and in their vision of the future, they like the whole land from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River to be governed on the basis of race. Everyone who is not Jewish should be a second-class citizen in that land, and in the discrimination that's already happening there, the forced removals that are happening, the rationing of water, all of these South Africa did. A lot of villages, the area I live in, the township, it was forcibly moved, demolished from where it was, and driven far away from, because they considered it too close to the white community. It had to be moved to a place they called Vergenoegen. It was far enough. So, and many communities were treated in the same way, forced removals, and all that's happening in Israel now. We've seen it happen in South Africa.
Thank you, Moss. Edwin, is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of similarities, in terms of differences, in terms of what is being defined then, and then why is it now? And also in terms of the difference between the sanctions that South Africa received at the time and the sanctions that Israel is not receiving. Yet, even at the UN, even at the international laws, as I think Naomi told us, that what they're doing has been termed illegal and criminal.
So thank you. Yes. So just to add to what Moss has already said, it's important that we distinguish between what is called petty apartheid and grand apartheid. And so petty apartheid is, you may not sit on the same bench and those kind of things. Where grand apartheid is when you take people's land, actually, you destroy the other, the person defined as the other. So there's no question about it that it is a system of apartheid there. Now, it is also, of course, a very legal word. So the UN has a particular definition of apartheid. And this has been studied. And I tell you now, I'm actually tired of this conversation about Israel and apartheid state, because it has been studied in depth. And people who are really interested in the question, they must read. There are 3 documents that they can go and read very easily. The first one they can read is the Russell Tribunal on apartheid, on whether Israel is an apartheid state. We hosted the Russell Tribunal on Palestine in Cape Town in 2011, I think it was. This is now 10 years ago. And there was a very clear report set out and very clear judicial reasons given in that report on why Israel is an apartheid state. So 10 years ago, this was already quite clear. Okay, so we leave it for the moment at that report. Let's assume people say we don't want to listen to that report. Then they can go read the Beit Tselem report, which is a Jewish NGO. And again, the Beit Tselem report is very clear, and it stipulates very clearly why Israel is an apartheid state. And then finally, a body whom no one thought would ever say that, it's the Human Rights Watch. And Human Rights Watch is in the US, and they have now come out after the Beit Tselem report. They've come out and said these are the very clear reasons. Now, people must really go and read those reports, and those reports are very clear, and it stipulates things very clearly. And if you're not into reading long reports, the executive director of HRW recently put out an op-ed just where he explains in very simple terms how they came to this decision, a decision they did not want to make, but they actually got to that. So yes, so for me, I think it's important that we actually move on. Let's move on the conversation. From those of us who are in South Africa, and when we visit Palestine, we even say that what is happening there is worse than apartheid. So it's not even, the question isn't even more, is it apartheid? It's actually worse. I mean, there was never a moment when the apartheid regime in South Africa would drop bombs on Soweto. I mean, that just did not happen. They were quite evil in terms of other things that they did. But I mean, what's happening today is completely inhuman. It's unacceptable, but they are acting with impunity simply because they can. The only option now that's left actually is for citizens across the world, like we are doing at the moment, but for citizens across the world to begin to stand up. You know, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Helmut Kohl did not want to implement sanctions against South Africa. And what happened in all those countries was that the ordinary citizens stood up. And that's the only hope that we have. So if those in power, in political power, do not want to take a stand, well, the people must take a stand. And I've seen it happening. We as South Africans, we have actually seen it happening. And we have seen how it is possible to take citizen action despite what your president or whatever says. And so that's what we will encourage people to do. You know, ordinary people, don't think you don't have power. You do have power. Use that power.
Thank you. I want to stay within the South African country for a bit, because I want to tackle something called the Kairos document and then also the Palestine Kairos document. And Edwin, you are very instrumental in the creation of the South African Kairos document. Please share what it is and how that has impacted the Palestinian community, and what the mutual co-learning that's happening, and what are the lessons we have. And then for Uncle Moss, I'd like you to speak about, I know it's obvious that there's no Kenyan clergy on this call. Why is it so hard for clergy to stand with Palestine? So we'll start with Edwin.
So thank you. Actually, I was in my early 20s when the South African Kairos document was written, and the Institute for Contextual Theology, there was an institute who actually was behind the drafting of it. They came to us as young people and they said, here's the draft, what do you think? And I remember very clearly how it's like a biblical story, you know, how your heart burns within you, simply because the words that you read are exactly what you are feeling, but you've never been able to articulate it, and you've never had a framework within which to think about it. And so the September 1985 Kairos document had a huge impact, not only in South Africa, but also globally. In fact, I think there was a Kenya Kairos document at one stage as well. I think there was some people in Kenya who actually started drafting a Kenya Kairos document. But yes, it had a huge impact locally. The important thing to say again about it is that institutionally, it wasn't necessarily sort of widely accepted. In other words, it did not arise from within the institution. It arose from the people on the ground. That's where it arose from. So we did not wait until an Anglican synod or a Catholic synod or a Lutheran synod said, yes, we agree, therefore you can release it now. No, we went ahead and released it. And it was, I mean, it was actually called a challenge to the church. It wasn't a challenge to the apartheid state, it was a challenge to the church. And so it's an internal, I almost want to say family conversation that we were having. And ultimately, those of us who supported the Kairos document, we knew that we were on the right side of history, and that prophetic theology was what was needed, as opposed to the two other theologies, namely state theology and church theology. Church theology is a kind of a neutral kind of theology, and that's the problem with most of the church. The church is mainly neutral. But if you do stand neutral, you are on the side of Pharaoh. You're not on the side of the slaves. If you are neutral, you're on the side of the oppressor. That's where you are. And so people must be asked to take a stand and to say, like Luther at one stage said, you know, here I stand, I can do no other. And we must ask Christians to take a stand for justice, for love, for peace, for compassion. That's the kind of stand. As far as Kairos Palestine was concerned, we were actually at the launch of the Kairos Palestine document in Bethlehem in 2009. And the Palestinians, of course, they were saying to us, of course, you know, we were inspired by you and so on. The truth is that the Palestinians actually re-inspired us. They gave us energy, they gave us inspiration at the time, and so it's a kind of a symbiotic relationship that we have, and I can only thank God for Kairos Palestine. We can say more about the content, but just to say that yes, they felt that they wanted to give a message to the world and to the church, and they used the idea of a Kairos document inspired from our one, but that they actually re-inspired us.
Suhail wants to add something, 5 seconds on the Kairos document before we go to Uncle Moss.
Yeah, just to talk a little bit about the Kairos document, especially in South Africa. I feel like that was a key indicator of African solidarity, especially that was a landmark in showing that the Palestinian struggle is not just a Muslim struggle, it's an interfaith struggle. And it also incorporated how I, for example, am not of Christian faith, but it just shows that the discussion on Palestine is an interfaith discussion. It involves everyone, whether you belong to a religion or you don't belong to a religion. And also something that was key in it was that liberation theology is a key aspect in which people can use to fight for the justice of the people in Palestine. And adding up into one of the questions that Carol had asked earlier is, can you support Palestine and be a Jew? And the answer is, sorry, can you support Palestine and support the Jews? And essentially, yes. And the whole weaponization of anti-Semitism comes into play, where if we continue weaponizing this ideology that critiquing Israel falls into discrimination, in essence, the people who will get hurt are the Israeli Jews, because in essence, any sort of conversation will, or any sort of critique, any sort of analysis will fall back into anti-Semitic rhetoric, and it means we won't be able to speak out once this violence is actually happening against this demographic. And so I think the Kairos document was actually very key and very landmark, and which broke the ice in showing that liberation theology is intersectional and involves everyone regardless of what religion, what faith you stand by or align to.
Thank you, Suhail. So Uncle Moss, why is liberation theology in East Africa a challenge? And
yeah, I think that here's my take at it. A couple of reasons. One is that liberation struggles, liberation ideas, and liberation theology are all subversive ideas. They often come at a cost. You can disappear, you can be arrested, you can be all manner of harm can be done to you. And so church leaders are not, don't like that. There was a Catholic priest in Latin America, I think Oscar Romero, who had very simple questions to ask in his country. Why are the poor, he said, when I feed the poor, people call me a saint. When I ask why the poor are hungry, they call me a communist. And then he died. He was assassinated by those people who thought communism. Thought he was a communist. So you can you can die. Martin Luther King was killed for ideas. He was a most peaceful and person, but he was executed. So you can get killed if you hold subversive ideas. It's almost the case that religion as an institution has very easy cop-out mechanisms to just become an inner pietistic affair that doesn't deal with the difficult questions of life. And unfortunately, you find too many people who use religion in that way, which is quite different from how Jesus looked at Christianity. He looked at death in the eye and did not flinch. He was executed, and he asked people to follow him. Very clear. I mean, he said to Peter once, "Peter, you know they're going to kill you one day," and as if he was discouraging him. And indeed, they killed Peter. You know, a lot of his disciples were killed. And so this thing that you should dodge death, that clergy normally would like to do, is foreign to Christianity. The second thing that I think makes this a problem, particularly the struggle of the Palestinian people and solidarity with it, is that, you know, it's often said that Christianity in Africa is 1 mile wide and 1 inch deep, by which it is often alleged that people in Africa have a very superficial grasp of their faith that they hold on to. It is still, it seems to them, a foreign religion. They just hold on to it just to not go to hell. But they are not rooted, and they don't even know Jesus well enough. They do not, because Zionism and Christian Zionism requires a negation, a fundamental negation of Christ. Zionism assumes that the return of Jesus requires a temple. And that's why the temple in Jerusalem is very big for Zionists and Christian Zionists. But Jesus said the true worshippers don't need a temple, telling the Samaritan woman. And yet Christians fall for the idea that Jesus needs a temple. And the Zionists fall, Christian Zionists fall for the Jewish idea that the Messiah should bring the dynasty of David. King David ruled over Israel many years ago. They think the Messiah must re-establish the dynasty of David in present-day Israel and take all the land that King David had from the Mediterranean to the river, from north to south. That's the Jewish vision. The current Jewish or Israel have aspirations of the land that is completely under Jewish control, as David had it. And Jesus is not that kind of Messiah. He's not a tribal Messiah for Jewish people alone. He's the Messiah for all people. And yet, in Africa, you find people falling for the idea that Jesus is what Jewish people think the Messiah should be. You know, when Jesus died to say, I'm not that kind of guy. You know, I am the savior of the whole world. But you find people in the nursing Jewish messianic aspirations, you can't find the reason they do it. And so, and I come down to this, that we are very shallow in our Christian theology. It's a very sad state that anyone, any political ideology can tie wool around our eyes and we will blindly follow.
Thank you, Uncle Moss. Naomi, I want us to now look at a few from the political angle. What role would you say bodies like the UN, the ICC, because no one has been jailed yet? The ICC is just for Africans, maybe, I think. But what role does the UN, all these political bodies, and you've really clearly explained about the role of the British and the US in this struggle, but this international peace societies or peace bringing bodies, what is their role in this conflict crisis? I don't even know what to call it. Naomi.
Thank you, Carol, for that question. I should say that internationally, the UN and the ICC, in the ideal world, these two bodies are expected to, of course, create a world order through creating legal frameworks, structures, and systems that ensure the realization of human, animal, and environmental rights globally. But the kind of silence we are seeing in the UN, the indifference, the kind of indifference we are seeing even by the International Criminal Court, while many people feel that what Israel is doing is already crimes against humanity, causing genocides in Palestine. These two bodies are silent. So it leads me to the original problem created, because of course they provided venue and they were a very critical player in the partitioning of Palestine in 1947 and the creation of the Israel state. So when you look at their response, you only think that they feel it is okay that things are happening that way, and therefore they are not even able to take an action to hold this government, this state accountable, because the UN and the ICC have a primary duty to hold accountable aggressors for their deeds against nations, against individuals, against communities and the environment. This is not what we are saying. So I sometimes tend to think that they are like, let them deal with their problem. Yet I keep thinking, you created this problem. You should be in the forefront of seeking genuine solutions. Instead, we have these superpowers like America pushing for two-state solution, which do not genuinely include the aspiration and the experiences of the Palestinian masses. So I don't think they are playing the role they're supposed to play. They are not holding Israel to account for all these crimes against humanity. And leading human rights organizations like the Human Rights Watch have said they are committing crimes. Amnesty that what Israel and action need to be taken by these bodies, but they're not doing that. So I think the indifference for me is worrying, but I'm also not too surprised, because again, we know who calls the shots in the UN. We know what position. America is a permanent member of the Security Council, and we know very well the position they have taken all the time is against the Palestinians. So I hear the voice of America in the UN. I will not be surprised that the same voice is in the ICC. I might be wrong, but that's what I feel.
Thank you, Naomi. So I'm going to, there have been quite a lot of questions, and I will give each of the panelists a question from you. The ones that I feel have been answered, I will skip over, but I will give the question and then also give the chance for the panelists to give their closing remarks with the questions. So I'll start with Suhail. A question to the panel from Dominion Silas. Who does Israel address on the Palestinian side in case peace talks resume? Hamas, Fatah, PLO? That's from Dominion Silas. And I'd also received another question before about Hamas, and I was asked, when I hear folks kick off with comments about the legitimate state of Israel, I switch off, and that Hamas has an agenda which manifests in pumping rockets into Israel seems pretty clear. Beyond that, the impact of military action by both sides on everyday Palestinians is horrendous. So the role of Hamas, Fatah, PLO, and closing remarks in a minute, if that is possible.
I think for both of them, I will speak about the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Yasser Arafat's contribution. Because once we look at the Oslo Accords and once we look at the two-state solution, the PLO had accepted this as a solution, but they also understood what the Israeli fascist regime is doing in occupied Palestine. And it's the same thing with Hamas. So as early as 2004, Hamas had actually acknowledged the two-state solution, but Western media and corporate media have continued propping up this as these two organizations rejecting the two-state solution and the peace deal and having some sort of agenda. And it's always, whenever, I would say, whenever in essence, I think looking at what's happened in Sheikh Jarrah and also at Al-Aqsa, what happened, the Israeli occupational forces attacked before even Hamas retaliated. So what Hamas is doing is retaliating because they are the governing state of the Gaza Strip, because the Gaza Strip has the right to self-governance at this moment because it's become an open-air prison. There's no going in, there's no going out. Everything is secluded in this one area. And this seclusion is intentionally manufactured by the Israeli Zionist regime. So once we look at these questions where every time we speak about Palestinians and then we deflect and start speaking about Hamas and PLO and all these other institutions, it's an agenda to discredit the histories and erase the violence that Palestinians have been facing. So in essence, what's happening, and giving an example, is if a state, if Israel has the right to self-defense, so does the Gaza Strip. And this is what Hamas is doing, because Hamas is the legitimate democratically elected governing structure in the Gaza Strip, because the Israeli regime does not cater in terms of social service and welfares for the populations locked within the Gaza Strip. And it's important to realize the Gaza Strip is the world's largest open air prison, because you're deprived of your basic needs, you're deprived of human dignity, you're deprived of your humanity, and you're still expected to stay in this little area with no voice because your voice has been taken away from you. So what exactly are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to take part in the semantics of nonviolence? And for nonviolence to work, as Arundhati Roy says, for nonviolence to work, you must have an audience. The Palestinian people have no audience. It's just this time we are seeing that we're seeing the shift in public opinion, and we're seeing how social media has played a really key role in fighting against Israeli backed propaganda. And they are telling their stories, and we are listening to the stories, and we are boosting the stories. And yeah, I think whenever we speak about Palestine and Israel, we need to look at them as, first of all, we need to look at the question, does Israel have the right to exist? And then the second thing is, do Palestinians have the right to self-defense? And even using this neoliberal international laws, we do see that Palestine does have the right to self-defense, because if we look at Palestine, they are colonized people. And under international law and international doctrines, colonized people are do have the right to resistance, and how they choose to resist is up to them. You can't confine how they choose to resist, and you can't impose to them how they choose to resist. If they decide to choose stones, that's up to them. If they decide to be represented by Hamas, that's up to them. So I think we can't continue downplaying this discourse on the basis of Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas is a terrorist organization because the US is in Israel, and they're looking for justification to continue the disenfranchising and precarizing the Palestinian people. So we also need to take all this into consideration. I hope that has answered the questions. And just to close, I think one thing we need to understand is it's not enough to just be anti-Zionist. We all need to be abolitionists at this point, because we don't want to see Zionism being reformed. We want to see an end to Zionism, because once we see an end to Zionism, it means that people in Israel, people in Palestine will be able to live freely and will have access to what they are. We don't want to see the continuation of the IOF and other mechanisms. And this is what happens most times. So yeah, and also picking up from the Kairos report, we have to be actively anti-war, we have to be actively anti-imperialism, we have to be actively anti-Zionism, and to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. You can't speak about African liberation without the freedom of Palestinians, and that's something we do need to understand. The freedom of Palestinians is a global issue and is a Pan-Africanist issue, and it also is an internationalist issue. It's for us all to ensure that we see. And also, just to add, on the issue of anti-Semitism, we've seen how a lot of countries have taken the phrase, the Palestinian resistance phrase, from the river to the sea, and now it's being termed as anti-Semitic. That isn't the case, and it's a myth, and it's the continued weaponization to downgrade and defang the revolutionary nature of this fight for freedom and liberation of Palestinians. As Moss had said earlier, or was it Edwin, the phrase simply refers to the Palestinian territory from River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. And I do hope that in our lifetimes we will see from the river to the sea the freedom of Palestine.
Thank you. Thank you, Suhail. I'd like to give, I think, Naomi, you'd spoken about the interests of the US. Could you explain the particular interests US have in Israel that justify their support for Israel? I think you had explained that. So maybe you could give your closing remarks if there's anything else you want to add on that question from Isaac Maura. Naomi?
Thank you. I hadn't realized that I was muted. So generally, I have also tried to respond to that question on chat. I simply said that, in my opinion, the US is a long-time political and economic ally in the region. I mean, a political ally and economic ally to Israel, because of its interest and of control of the oil in the region. And also when you look at how Israel receives financial and military assistance, it's more than any other foreign countries. But also remember, America has been involved in the brokering of the peace deal in Palestine, Israel for so long. And I mentioned that America's position on the peace deal has not been very genuine and not in the interest of the Palestinians. We must also not forget that since Israel started the annexation of Palestinian land, causing insecurity, locking refugees, Palestinian refugees, and even taking over East Jerusalem, what America could only do is reward them with moving their embassy to East Jerusalem instead of condemning that. They've not been condemning all these things. All we have seen is America and other powerful states continuously disregarding the claims of the Palestinians on the board, issues security, issues land, issues, Jerusalem. So I think they have a lot of interest, also because the war, and Ursula explained this a bit, the war consumes creates consumerism for the arms they sell. So it is a symbiotic relationship between America and Israel, because they depend on each other on issues militarism, but also issues capitalism and imperialism. So I think that for me is the main interest they have. And anyone who kind of seems to be coming in to destabilize the status quo is basically destabilizing the joy of America in terms of resources and in terms of arms. Thank you. And in my parting shot, I would say that just like Reverend Edwin said, Bishop Edwin said, we must stand on the right side of history, because one day history will judge us so harshly if we continue with our silence on this conflict. This conflict is our conflict, because human rights violation anywhere is human rights violation everywhere. So this is our problem. We must speak out, and speak out loudly, so that this violation is brought to an end, and so that Israel is held accountable for all the war crimes that it is committing to the whole world, because they are committing this to us.
Thank you so much, Naomi. It's so good to have you. Edwin, is there something biblical about it? I think we've spoken about it. Are they fulfilling a prophecy, not looking for an excuse, please? And that's a question for Stephen Olan as you're winding up.
Yes. Prophecy has a very particular definition. Prophecy is when you comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Mm-hmm. The afflicted at the moment in Palestine are the Palestinian people. And prophetic theology, therefore, is about supporting the Palestinian people. That's what prophecy is. Not this thing where they start predicting things and they call it prophecy. Prophecy is about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. My final word is thank you, Carol and Singi Trust, for hosting this conversation. And I really hope that those of us in South Africa and those in Kenya, those in Nigeria, and in other places across the African continent, that we will stand together, that we create a united front for Palestine, and that Africans must never be accused of supporting injustice, but that we support the people of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. Thank you so very much. Uncle Moss, there's a question here about what sort of discrimination between Ashkenazi Jews and Falasha? This is from Yusuf Umer. And then your parting shots as well.
What is the discrimination between what?
Between the Ashkenazi Jews and the Falasha.
It's the Ethiopian Jews.
Mm. Oh, okay. I was going to say
the way Black Jews are treated.
Yeah, thanks for simplifying the question for me, Edwin. It is, again, I think it is the clearest manifestation of Israeli racism. It is purely because there is a race factor there. The Ethiopians are darker, and that often marks you out for oppression anywhere in the world. And so that is the simple answer. And my parting shot to this again is simply to say thank you, Carol, for putting this together. I think all of us as African people have got a colonial experience. We bear scars in our lives from colonialism and the pain that the racists have committed against Africa. And may we not assume that it is not the same people who are supporting Israel. The same people who caused colonization on the continent are exactly the same people who are supporting, enabling, and abetting Israel's oppression of people, Palestinians. So let's stand together and figure out how we can counter those elements in our societies that would say otherwise.
Thank you so very much, Uncle Moss. And to all, we've gone 10 minutes overboard. There was a lot to be discussed. This could easily have been a 2-hour, 3-hour, whole day, whole week seminar, but we were able to hopefully engage in conversations that will leave you asking more questions, but at least from right perspective. From me here at Msingi Trust, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. I'd like to thank Pesh Karaoke for helping us with the social media. I'd like to thank Suhail, Naomi, Edwin, Uncle Moss for being here and for giving us a great conversation. This conversation will be on the Singi page, Facebook Live, so you can come back to it and ruminate on it. And I think we will leave social media details of the speakers so that if you have any questions, please go and ask them, because I have many more questions. So I think the beauty of this conversations is that they give us more questions, but it's questions that lead us to freedom. So thank you very much. And as always, God has shown us what is good, and what does he require of us? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. And so let's go and do justice. Quiet.
Thank you so much, Carol, and it's been a pleasure being part of this conversation.